Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. Does your security awareness training sound more like secure coding or the Silmarillion? For example, does it sound like you're explaining how brothers Elros and Elrond were descended from the three houses of the Edain, but in part also both from the Eldar and the Maiar? Are you throwing around terms that are about as familiar as the line of Finwë, from Fingolfin and Finarfin to Finrod, sometimes Felagund, and Sister Galadriel? Because training needs to be more than taxonomy and trivia to be impactful. After all, to write secure code, developers will need to go there and back again. Which means this week we chat with Dustin Lehr about ways Appsec can better engage and better deliver security concepts for developers. Tell a story and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest Appsec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. In 2024, the future of identity, security, and digital transformation converges at Octane, hosted by Okta. On October 15th through 17th, join the brightest minds in tech and business in Las Vegas or online as they explore groundbreaking innovations and unveil the latest Okta solutions to keep your organization secure, connected, and ahead of the curve. Whether you're a developer, an IT or security leader, or a visionary, Octane is your gateway to transforming tomorrow, today. Security Weekly listeners only need to pay $100 for your full conference pass for Octane by using the discount code OKTNSC24 at securityweekly.com/Octane2024 and can stream the event live on okta.com/Octane. That's OKTANE. This is episode 299, recorded September 16th, 2024. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John, return of the Kinsella. Hello, John.
I'm here to do my best to try and throw you off your rhythm, so I'm going to come and go when you're not expecting it.
Oh, just don't ask me to name all of the dwarven lineages. There's a lot of Durans in there, but it gets really, really complicated. But the other reason we have people here to make things less complicated are people like Dustin Lehr, who is the co-founder and chief product and technology officer at Catalyst. He is also the driving force behind the Security Champion Program Success Guide. He has a wealth of experience in application security and is the founder of the Let's Talk Software Security monthly open discussion meetup group. Hello, Dustin. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, great to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
And we're looking forward to having you here because one of the things that prompted me to reach out was a post you had made on LinkedIn about OWASP Dev Day. And unfortunately, it wasn't necessarily a happy post because Dev Day was canceled. It seems like lack of interest, lack of, honestly, sign up from developers. And I wanted to dive in and with a constructive discussion, sort of what happened and what could we do about it. But I think, I read the post, but perhaps you can set us up with, what happened with DevOps Day, or why did we have that unfortunate event where we had some, we had to cancel?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I prefer to post happy things, but I also wanted to bring more attention to, I think, what is sort of a general issue that we face in Appsec, and that's we don't necessarily have a lot of developers involved. So the way that this came about is OWASP reached out to me. They wanted me to get involved in terms of helping to organize this Dev Day, which was supposed to take place during the Global Appsec Conference. And through the course of setting the whole thing up, we started to realize that there weren't a lot of signups. There's not a lot of interest in this whole concept in general. So we started to get concerned and did a few other things, advertised it a little bit more, tried to reach out to people, tried to build support for the event. And eventually we had to make the very hard decision that this is not going to happen. So we pulled the plug. Very unfortunate. Let's talk more about sort of what we can do to build support for an event like this. But as of now, we had to cancel the event this year.
Yeah, and that's part of the what to do better, because I definitely don't want to frame it as developers don't care about security, developers don't care about OWASP Dev Day. Maybe the fault is not in the stars, but within ourselves, this type of thing. And part of it is just maybe there's marketing, branding. How much do you think there was awareness of just what OWASP is? Or if we can't guess on the developer side, what do we do better to build something like OWASP or just AppSec training in general, so developers are like, oh, that sounds interesting and useful to me as a reaction?
Yeah, and I think one of the keys here and one of the biggest takeaways is that I don't think OWASP is involved in the developer community enough. I don't think enough developers even know what OWASP is. It kind of feels like a internal sort of community that we have of AppSec people that just like to talk about AppSec things and like to talk about developers without necessarily reaching outside of ourselves and getting involved in the developer community. So I think that's one of the biggest opportunities here is how do we get OWASP more in front of developers? I think the original concept for OWASP was to reach the developers. And then I think as AppSec grew, we sort of, again, I don't know, for whatever reason, self-selected, right? The AppSec people started to group together and we all started talking about OWASP. So I think we need to refocus on that original mission, try to figure out how to maybe have OWASP attend more dev conferences and maybe have us in general as AppSec professionals out there talking to devs. I also think it sort of represents or is a bit of a metaphor for the way that we can internally reach folks too. Like, do we as AppSec people spend enough time with the developers and creating those relationships and so forth? So I think there's a lot of different opportunities here. And I think what I'd like to see is, and sort of my post was a bit of a, hey, this is too bad, but it's also a call to action. This is not the end. This is the beginning. This very much indicated a potential issue or a real issue that we have to deal with in our community. How do we get out there and start to change this? And I think, eventually I'd love to see a dev day. I think we need to sort of work our way up to it. I think there's, again, attending more developer conferences, getting OWASP in front of folks, getting AppSec in front of folks, getting security in front of folks, maybe having smaller events, that invite developers and maybe virtual events. And then we sort of work our way up to where we can actually host a dev day and have it be well attended.
Yeah. And I like the point too about the metaphor of this is relevant, I think, to enterprises, organizations also doing internal AppSec outreach, because on the one hand, there might be, here is mandatory 1 hour a year training. Here's a mandatory secure coding. That's really not relationship building. That's just, you got lucky because the org, the company said you have to pay attention to us. So that's another reason why I wanted, hopefully for listeners, seeing that comparison between internal enterprise and Dev Day. But focusing on the Dev Day, you already rattled off a couple things like attending developer conferences, bringing the message to them rather than forcing them or expecting them to come. Doing sort of that iterative approach of, as you describe, just building up different ways of outreach. But what about the content as well? Do you either how application security awareness or secure coding is either being pitched or how it's being delivered? And here, my question is more not just what would you do to make it good? I think that's a little too open-ended. But what have you seen in developer conferences that seem useful to emulate? They're speaking developer language or developer approaches, or so that security doesn't look so different other than in perhaps area of focus.
Yeah, a couple thoughts here. I think one thing we could definitely try to focus on is inviting developers and architects, sort of the application architect folks, to get more involved in these types of events, speaking at security events and so forth, because I think they bring content. They're also, possibly recognized by the developers as well to sort of draw them in. But in terms of raw content, I think developers like to code. Right? They like to see systems. They like to see code. They like to see tips and tricks at very much the technical level. I think a lot of conferences that we all enjoy happen a little bit more at maybe like the policy standards guidelines level. They're going to want to see like raw code. They're going to want to see that stuff. They're going to want to see specific recommendations in terms of languages to use and code examples, what to do, what not to do, that sort of stuff. So I definitely think that was part of the issue, is we had trouble finding security folks who are able to or willing to speak to some of those low level details, and maybe inviting actual devs to speak could be a good path here for us.
I like that aspect too that you mentioned of architects in particular, and you described a little bit too about perhaps they're more strategic, they're thinking about frameworks, or even them as presenters. Have you had success for that in for example in enterprises, having them as your speakers on security, or the areas of more influence on security?
Yeah, like security champions. I can't get away without talking about security champions.
I set you up on that one, didn't I?
Yeah, I think architects make a nice bridge, right, between dev and security. And this comes a bit from my own experience as a dev, and then I was an architect for a few years myself, because I think architects are thinking at a bit of a different sort of higher order about the application that they're building, right? They're not just making it work. It's about maintainability and support and performance and security. So they're sort of bringing that viewpoint to the rest of their devs. At least that's what I try to do, as sort of a mentor to the rest of the devs. Like, this code works, great, but did you think about these other things? How can we sort of rewrite this to be more maintainable? There's possibly a security concern here. Let's go through that, right? So again, I think those architects make really nice bridges, right, between the security team and the devs. And that's where I think, at least internally, those can be some of those initial security champions. But also externally, if we're going to talk about Dev Day and the opportunities there, finding more architects out there that are security minded, and then finding a way to bring them in, have them speak at the conference, or go meet them again. That's sort of two-way, like inviting devs to speak at our conferences, but also going out and speaking at theirs, and just even attending theirs, just to see what they're talking about, I think is a good strategy here.
Part of that too, especially if we're talking about architects, they're going to be, as you said, they're thinking at different levels. They have much more experience than someone who's a new college graduate or someone who's a junior programmer. So if you're designing a 45-minute presentation, are there different? How do you see that approach for what developer to go after? Is one of the problems trying to figure out, this is for developers who want to see that specific code. This is for developers who are only working on this one language using TypeScript for this front end. Here's a bunch of examples about cross-site scripting, blah, 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 versus here's someone who wants to design, the gotchas of an SSO implementation. Because I can imagine quite a wide range of topics. Is there a way that you would suggest to Appsec folks how to focus those based on what the developer audience is, rather than saying, here's the top 10 breakdown, here's who you're speaking to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, some of that, this lends itself pretty well, I think, to that internal security champion model, frankly, because the way that essentially works, and I think the strengths there, is actually in translation. So there's a bit of a element of maybe security team meets with the architects and says, hey, here's a best practice. Here's something we're going to roll out across the organization. And then the specific champions who know the context of their team and the languages that they work in and all of that can sort of take a lot of those guidelines and policies and translate them into something that their team can better consume. Maybe something like that could be done at more of an industry level as well, where you've got maybe messaging or sort of a rollout of a specific guideline and so forth. And then architects and other folks can get involved in terms of making it more specific for developers to consume more directly. I think this, it could be a challenge. Like, I think to your point, if somebody speaks at a conference, they're going to be talking about maybe their context, right? Their particular language and so forth. So how do we get it into the language that's actually going to be relevant for the devs? And I think this is a really good point, because devs are busy. It's like, hey, I've got this language, I'm trying to build this thing. How do I know more specifically what I should be doing instead of sort of general rules? So I think this is definitely a challenge we need to address.
part of the reason I'm thinking of this too is that you've got a background as a developer, I think, before you came over to the Appsec side more so. And my guess is that developers, like if it was just a developer day without the OWASP angle on it, implying security, I don't know, like I doubt they're going to have presentations on, the top 10 ways to do a linked list, or here's how, here's how you play with pointers on doubly linked lists, or here's how to reverse a list in place. Like, let's just talk about lists. And I'm kind of teasing on that is the sense of, let's talk about all the ways you can exploit SQL injection, or maybe that's not the thing that's going to be most resonant. What do developer conferences look like? And this is a little bit of, are they really that much different than security topics, or just basically trying to speak to the AppSec folks to be like, make that pitch to get them to come to developer conferences. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, and I think there's some concern here in general because, like I mentioned before, developers are busy. Like, they're not necessarily even going to go out of their way to go to a conference unless it is directly relevant to something that they're working on. So I think that is definitely a challenge. But to your question, as far as reaching them specifically and sort of trying to draw them in, I think there's a developer culture that I think we really need to lean into. There's like security culture, all of us on the AppSec side, we kind of do our thing and have our own norms, if you will. Developers have theirs. And I think if we're going to make a conference that's focused on developers, we need to do things that are going to be seen as, okay, they sort of get us as developers, right? An example that comes to mind is there's a lot of like late night coding that happens sometimes with like energy drinks and caffeine boosts. This is like Red Bull or Jolt back in the day, if you're a little bit older. And, I think that doing stuff like that, like have it sponsored by Red Bull and like doing things that make people feel like, okay, like they get us as devs instead of they're on that side and we're on this side. I think that's going to be important.
I'm just imagining the Regex creation party with sponsored by Red Bull gives you strings. There's missed marketing opportunity there. But let me ask this: obviously you're a fan of security champions. That's what you're pushing on, and the whole premise here is how to have like a DevOps days that's successful. But let me come at this also from an angle. Are we going to be successful with just security training? And I threw the word just in there maybe as a little bit of an out. But you mentioned like architects. What if we got just a smaller group of architects together, or we got some frameworks and we just said, rather than teaching security, we just said, please use this framework. And if you really need to use dangerously set inner HTML, that's an obvious, foot gun, whatever metaphor you want. But that's a different approach of, how much of secure coding can be successful? Should we just get rid of it, move on to something better, or help me be less pessimistic here?
Oh, there's so much to unpack here. I think in general, a lot of companies approach security training just from sort of a check the box type of thing. Like, hey, I need to just do this. Hey, developers, sorry, if we want to keep our PCI compliance, we're just going to have to have you take this training. Sorry about that. But I think we're missing an opportunity there to, and I think there's a lot of like vendor training tools and so forth that are popping up that are trying to be a little bit more interactive. And I think, I really think that's the key. I think that developers are very problem solving types, right? Like they have a challenge in front of them. They need to figure out a way out of that challenge. And I think a lot of the platforms we're seeing are a little bit more like that. So leaning into that instead of just check the box training where it's like, here's a video, take a quiz. Okay, now you can go on with your day. Finding a way to make it context specific, relevant to what they're doing, interactive. Here's broken code. Here's what it looks like. How would you fix it? Right. That sort of stuff I think is pretty effective. And then I heard another part of your question, which is kind of around to what extent should we be training them versus maybe just providing frameworks and so forth that handle a lot of this stuff for them. Got a few thoughts here. I think we are seeing more of those pop up. I think there's a handful that come to mind, like, things like Rust over C++. There's like Rocket for web apps that you can build on Rust. there's things like Spring and Django and Laravel, Ruby on Rails, there's ASP.NET Express. Like there's a lot of different frameworks out there that are security savvy. I definitely think we should be pushing those more or less. John, saw your little more or less security savvy, but to different degrees of success, I would say. But at least trying to make those better so that devs don't always have to think about it. That's one way, but I also think a big part of cybersecurity is it's like good guys versus bad guys, and there's this push and pull where you've got attackers thinking of new ways around all these frameworks too. So I don't think it makes sense to leave developers security ignorant. I think you should try to educate them and train them, and the better you're able to do that, the more they're going to be able to adjust and find ways to prevent, the attackers from getting in, So anyway, so those are some of my thoughts about training. I'm sure we could talk about that for a whole nother episode.
I want to try to take this a slightly different direction. And this might be fruitful or might not, so I'm just going to take a swing. Earlier you were talking about like sort of as you went from being a developer up into being an architect and looking at things differently. I think another way of looking at that is, let's be honest, there's good software developers and there's bad software developers. Or they could be junior, and as they grow, they become better. Or some just don't get better, right? So the thought I'm sort of fishing around in my head is security, in other words, from going from this is something we have to do to this is something that makes me a better software developer, is there an angle there of like, hey, by taking this class or by like studying about this Appsec thing, you're overall going to become a better software developer? Like I remember from high school, I don't think I've said it here before, one of the things that was sort of weird for me is my English actually got better, my grammar, by learning Spanish. Just because there's some forms of conjugation of verbs which just you didn't have naturally in English. And like that was interesting, sort of expand my brain that different way. And I'm wondering if is there something there, maybe we should be looking at this from a different, how we actually pitch this to some people?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think, again, a lot of folks on the security teams are approaching it from what they need. We need you to just take some training so we can check this box, as opposed to flipping it on its head and thinking about really what developers need, and then having messaging and communication and so forth that makes it clear this is for them. I think starting with the idea of this is for them and thinking about them from their shoes makes a lot of sense, and then getting all the messaging right and so forth. This is good for your career, to your point. This can help you grow. This is going to open up other doors for you too. Like this is just a good resume builder in general. A developer who is interviewing for a job who understands these secure coding concepts is a lot more attractive than otherwise. And then incentivizing them. This is a big part of where I've taken my own career, is going beyond awareness. Okay, sure, you're trained, great, but how do we actually incentivize you to use that training and take action, right? And putting in the proper incentives in terms of, requirements for a good performance review might now depend on more of your specific actions that you've taken when it comes to security. And then even, I think developers like the sort of the gamification elements too. Like if you can sort of work that stuff into your culture, making it, making leaderboards and making badges and just sort of reinforcing and recognizing when people are doing the right thing when it comes to security, I think is highly effective when it comes to reinforcing developer actions.
One of the things I hear as a manager, current gig and previous gigs, is developers are frequently looking for not just like, they want to fix the thing and get the feature out, but like if they take a step back, they're often thinking, how does this help my career? Or like, what is my, is this company helping train me or give me opportunities and new things? Or, so I think for others out there, I think there's something there around like, how do you not just empower them to write secure software, but, going through this, like maybe send them to a conference that has an AppSec arm on it, or hell, get them to speak about what they've done in AppSec at their job. It feels like there's more that can be done there besides like, you must do this.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of like begging today, hey, please fix things, as opposed to really leaning into what I think. And I've actually done a lot of analysis on this because we've got a handful of clients that we work with to help design these types of culture experiences. And developers, we've found, are highly motivated by things like purpose and meaning. They want to know that what they're doing contributes to sort of a larger solution. So anything you can lean into there. The other thing that was surprising that's come out of a lot of the research that we've done is that developers are very socially driven, okay, which is very impactful because people don't think of developers as social butterflies, okay? But there's this culture in engineering where what other people think of you is very important. You know, you walk in as a brand new developer, people are like, who are you? What have you done? What do you deserve to be here? I've been here for 10 years. What are you going to contribute? So there's a bit of this pecking order, and you sort of have to prove, your worth ultimately. And that's all a social thing. So the more that we can lean into recognizing people's contributions and all of that, and sort of hold them up to a certain status, the more that's very attractive to devs as well.
Yeah, one of the things I appreciate about this conversation is that I feel there's often an AppSec positioning trap where it's that frames this as we'll train developers, they'll know more about security, and the outcome will be fewer vulns. But if we just say the outcome we're driving to is fewer vulns, to John's point, that's not really like, okay, we have fewer vulns. How did that help my career? And I think, Dustin, to your point too, that's maybe there's a little bit of appeal there in the sense of, well, it saved me some time so I don't have to deal with this annoying noise that's coming in from my security tools. But again, I want to write code that builds my reputation, that others think like, oh, like so-and-so really helped me with this design with my linked list, because that's the only thing I could think of today. But if we intentionally, if I mentioned that, so intentionally saying AppSec, please don't frame this, a training program this way, especially to pitching for developers. Dustin, how would you maybe re-pitch a dev day or set up kind of a back of a napkin, kind of just brainstorming what would an effective agenda look like for a dev day that you would say, this is how to appeal to the developers. AppSec folks, you take a back seat right now.
Well, I think this answer would be tied up into the business case for security anyway, in my mind, and that's getting out of the firefighting mode. No developer likes that. Okay. Like, I'm very busy. I've got this sprint, there's a few stories that I'm on the hook for this week, and then bam, a production issue hits, and I don't have time to go troubleshoot this. This is just annoying. We don't like that unpredictability and sort of the surprise of like, hey, guess what? You're going to work the weekend because we have to page you because of some security problem in production that you introduced. That's never fun, right? So I think that's the appeal, is how to be more proactive, how to get your systems set up in a way that you're not constantly fighting fires and you can focus on the work that you have to do. And I think in terms of agenda, I would sort of position the talks around that concept. How can we make you more efficient as a developer? If you write efficient code, better code up front, you're going to be able to continue to grow your career and do interesting things, as opposed to fighting fires all day long and fixing the things that you might have messed up or your friends messed up. So that's kind of the angle that I would want to take. And again, I think that aligns very well with the business case for doing security in general. I think the FUD, right, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the scare tactics don't work as well as just the hard dollars of here's how many hours we're wasting fixing production issues that we could have prevented to begin with.
Yeah, and maybe just say production issues, resiliency. We don't even have to say explicitly security. These are all our shared outcomes. Dustin, you laid out a couple ideas of how you would change that agenda looking forward. Still in that spirit of constructive, looking forward, Dev Days isn't going away. I think you are actually actively trying to figure out what to do next. For a developer listening or AppSec folk listening, either side of that coin, what are some ways they could participate? What are some ways they can make the next Dev Days have some attendees and be successful at the end, at the end of the Dev Day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, my original LinkedIn post was all a call to action. I do think, there's more we can do to get involved, right? Go to dev conferences, connect with your developers internally, start a conversation, build a relationship, try to understand their side as much as you're trying to help them understand your side, and just have that good two-way relationship, I think, is key to all of this. So again, it's a call to action. I invite everybody to sort of think about better ways we can reach developers, and then hopefully work our way up to where developers are sort of part of our crowd, if you will. Maybe Application Security Weekly can have more devs on, and just like reach that level of involvement by devs. I think that would be fantastic.
I heartily agree. And we've had 2 or 3, I'll say pure devs on, folks that have some AppSec awareness of themselves, some security awareness, but their day-to-day job is in fact writing code. So that's how I'm framing or defining that. And you mentioned, having some scouts go out to those developer conferences. And I think I'll just add too, finding I'm always curious about what's an effective developer presentation. How are they speaking, using their language, and why can't AppSec imitate that? So that's my comment. But one last question I think for you, Dustin, would be if we roll forward a year from now and we see some type of culture, like a developer culture, a security culture, what might be 1 or 2 things you would point at to say, that's my definition of security culture over there. That's how I see it manifesting in the way that I think is positive for the community.
Oh yeah, I love that question. I think again, it's about establishing that relationship, which I think takes a lot of listening on both sides. I think having the developers respected to the point that they are proactively reaching out to the security team. This is actually something I typically measure in my security team. My security strategy is to what degree are developers actually connecting with us and bringing us into things and that sort of stuff. So I think if I was going to look at, the health of a relationship between devs and security, I'd look for that. Are they involving each other? Are they involving the security team early when they're doing designs and so forth? So I think that's key. And I think that's a strong indicator that you've done a good job building that relationship.
Yeah, and I think I just want to add to tweak there is that what you're describing is a good, healthy, organic outreach, rather than security says we're a gatekeeper and you must do this, therefore outreach is happening. You're measuring the wrong things there, or that's not clearly that's not what you were describing. But it's one of my pet peeves. I've seen that misused too much. So I needed to reinforce that.
Absolutely.
But, Dustin, while the road goes ever on, but this segment cannot. We're coming up to the end. So I do want to say thank you for joining us and giving us an idea of what happened with Dev Days, and fingers crossed, we've got a new one coming up in the near future that will be successful and well attended.
I think it's just a matter of time. So thanks so much for having me. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thanks again, Dustin. Thanks again, John. And thank you to everyone listening. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.